Hello and welcome to Perspectives. My name is Dan McGraw. Today's guest is Diana DiZoglio. She's currently in office serving in the 14th Essex, which includes what communities?
It includes portions of North Andover, Haverhill, Lawrence, and Methuen. And thank you for having me on the show today, Dan.
You're welcome. All of the candidates received the questions in advance, and I think what we'll do is use the questions as a basic text and kind of move in a conversational style from the questions. If you would like to receive copies of the questions, feel free to contact the office and I'll be happy to email them to you. So the first question that we had on the docket today, and I would say the theme of these questions, Diana, are ethics. If thinking about it, I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Certainly.
And I was thinking about ethics as a foundation for government.
It's a good place to start.
Yeah, Lenny Mira and I were just talking, and I had another person back in 2012, Tom Weaver, who had run as a Republican. I forget who he ran against. But he came on and he described, I don't know if you've heard this story before, I just repeated it last show, on the difference between a Democrat or a democracy and a republic. And he said a democracy is you have two wolves and a sheep and they're voting on dinner. And a republic is you have two wolves and a sheep, but it can't be a sheep for dinner. So you start with a rule of law, which guides the democracy. So it's not just a majority. With the way I was raised to think that we lived in a democracy, and it was majority rule, and that was fair. And so the voice of the minority would be silenced because it was fair. The majority of people had voted for such and such a thing. But if you start with ethics as a ground, and that there are some ethics which nobody can cross, then even if a majority of the people say they want such and such a law, they can't have that law because it violates basic ethical principles like the golden rule. You know, I'm not going to do to you what I don't want you to do to me, or you know, do unto others, that sort of thing. So if we start with a kind of a basic rule of law which guides what the majority can and cannot. They can vote, but where that vote can go. For instance, I grew up in the civil rights movement, you know, so there was a lot of laws that were based on race, which of course, if you had a republic, which we do, and you had the rule of law, which was by ethics, then none of those laws could have been passed because they would have violated those ethics. So with that as a beginning, I referenced in the questions the Declaration of Independence, Tom Jefferson saying that there was a kind of a divine origin, a natural origin to our laws, in the sense that human nature is designed in a particular way. We have reason. Because we have reason, we have free will. We're allowed to make choices, whether they're good choices or bad choices. That's our nature. And to pursue our happiness in any way that we decide that makes us happy, as long as I don't infringe on somebody else, you know, and vice versa. So that those become kind of a basic ethical framework. The Bill of Rights, freedom again. That theme of freedom, free press, freedom of thought, freedom of ideology, freedom to practice how you want. So I just wanted your reflections on that, if I'm not already taken all the thoughts about it.
So on the freedoms and the liberties that we do have underneath the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, is that what we're talking about? Just want to be clear.
More the Bill of Rights.
Okay.
Than the Constitution, because the Bill of Rights, as you'll remember, was passed because they were concerned about the 1787 Constitution, that it was going to exceed personal liberty It was going to take away the rights of the states. Prior to the 1787 Constitution, we had a confederation, and a confederation is, as you know, all states are equal. Whereas a federation is a national law, and the state law is subsumed under national law. Whereas in a confederation, you had a very small and limited national government with very strong states. And so that shifted everything when we moved from the first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, to the Constitution that we have today, which was in 1787. So back in those days—
And I certainly commend you for being the history buff that you are. It's very refreshing to speak to somebody who has such an in-depth understanding of the Constitution and of our history here in this nation. It is very refreshing, and it's even more refreshing to hear it from somebody who is a constituent of mine over in Methuen. So thank you for actually asking this question and these questions that we're going to be discussing here today. I think that certainly what you're saying is very important, and that we should continue to make this something that we bring to the forefront and discuss not only now but in the future moving forward. I think that you're touching upon some very good points. So regarding the Bill of Rights, regarding certain liberties and certain freedoms that we have and our ability to vote and to participate in the process, like what you were asking, my opinion on it. I take what you're saying, and you're the history buff, and I give you credit for it, and I absolutely love it. The way that my mind operates and the way that I think about things is more by example. So my understanding of what we're talking about is the ability for people to be able to vote on certain issues, and I'm taking this down to what I do in my capacity as state representative. Certainly, we can talk about these issues in various capacities for various elected officials, mayors, U.S. senators, people who are serving in different appointed positions. But looking at it from the position of a state representative, there are some things that you mentioned that directly do have to do with the state and with a state representative's job and a state representative's perspective. So I'm going to talk about that. What I understand is that you're asking me about voters and their ability to vote on different issues and to participate in the process, and what my opinion is about the government's role in that and the voters' role in that. Now, what I'm thinking is about the past year and a half, or a little over the year and a half that I've spent in public office with the amazing opportunity to serve the city of Haverhill, Methuen, town of North Andover, city of Lawrence. And we've had several issues come up before us in which the voters have had the opportunity to decide. Now, that hasn't happened yet since I've been elected, but it will be happening this November on the ballot, at which time there will be several ballot questions where the voters are going to be able to participate in the process directly and have a vote directly on particular issues that are going to impact their lives and the lives of their families. That doesn't always happen. Many times different decisions are made by the legislature, and the ideas that become laws have to go through a very lengthy process, the legislative process. So what happens is people vote for an elected official, and that elected official is elected to make decisions along with the rest of the legislative body in a process that has several checks and balances. There's the House of Representatives, which is checked off by the Senate, the body of the Senate, which is checked off and balanced by the executive branch, the governor, and then obviously we have the judicial branch, which is separate from the legislature. But that is one form of governing, and that's one way in which voters have the opportunity to express their opinions. They vote for elected people like myself, and we make the decisions the best that we can to make sure that we are effectively representing our constituents and the body of people that we've been elected by. That's one way that we get to express our votes, is by voting for elected officials who make decisions on our behalf, and we trust those people to do what they feel is in the best interest of their constituents. On the ballot questions that are happening and that have happened in the past, I believe that those are great ways to let your voices be heard when you feel like you maybe can't get something done through the traditional process of your elected officials. I completely believe in the process of being able to do ballot initiatives and allowing our constituents to have a voice. and to pass something by a majority and, do things relative to that. But what happened in the past, for example, was we took up medical marijuana, we took up several other items, and that in particular passed on the ballot. Now our elected officials are going through the process of trying to make sure that they are acting in correspondence with what the voters have decided themselves through a ballot initiative. In the fall, we're going to be seeing other ballot initiatives. We're going to be seeing a ballot initiative for the casinos. We're going to be seeing a ballot initiative for paid sick time, earned sick time, amongst other items. So that's a venue in which voters will have the opportunity to actually express their opinion and have a direct vote on a particular issue, in which case their vote will be directly heard and result in the majority of votes will either pass a ballot initiative or cause the ballot initiative to fail.
Do you think there's laws on the books in Massachusetts at present which violate individual liberty?
In what regard are we talking about?
Any laws? Do you think, starting with the ethical principle of free will and personal individual choice, as long as we don't interfere with somebody else's choice, are there laws on the books that you would see that might need to be repealed or might need to be changed that are violating those personal, the right to choose?
Nothing comes to mind at this very moment. However, there is always a conversation being had about ways that we can improve upon our current laws and our current system. For example, we think that our election process, might be fair and might be clean and what have you. However, just a little over a year and a half ago, I had to file a bill to increase transparency in the election process and increase accountability in the election process, because we had some situations here locally in the Merrimack Valley in which people were refusing to abide by current law, and they were still being able to actually run for elected office, if you can believe that. We don't really know about those things usually until they, come at us head first, or head on, I should say. But once they do, it's our responsibility to make sure that we act accordingly to make sure that our constituents are protected. Certainly, if something should arise and was presented to me that I felt was in direct violation of the civil liberties of my constituents, I would be taking action on that, and I would be working together with my constituents to see what an effective way would be that we could address needing to change or amend current state law.
I'm thinking of prohibition, for instance. We had alcohol prohibition from 1919 to 1933, and then in the 1930s, they began the prohibition of drugs, heroin or cocaine or marijuana. None of those things had been there was no prohibition against drugs. And there was no prohibition against alcohol prior to 1919.
I think we're getting into a little bit deeper of a conversation here when it comes to things like civil liberties, certainly having the ability to make decisions for yourself if your decisions aren't necessarily harming somebody, or you feel like it's something that is a right of yours. There are differences of opinion, however, on what those rights actually may or may not be, especially when it comes to the fine detail of things like what you just mentioned, heroin, for example. Certain substances like that have done tremendous harm in our communities, and certainly we want to make sure that people feel as though they are able to exercise their rights to be able to make their own decisions, but also we want to make sure that their decisions aren't negatively impacting those around them, their communities, and that that they're not bringing harm to themselves unnecessarily. We want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to bring peace to the community instead of bringing harm to the community. So I think that there is...
That's an extreme case, and I pushed the limit, and you're the first person I've ever pushed that limit with in public. But marijuana, I'm thinking of marijuana in terms of, that's going to be coming up in 2016 in terms of legalizing. A couple of other states have legalized it. And in terms of the issue of harm that you brought up, and individual liberty. Certainly a case can be made for alcohol and the personal harm that people do to themselves and they do to others under the influence of alcohol. You know, terrible, terrible medical problems, terrible experiences with domestic violence related to alcohol, terrible experiences related to driving and alcohol. Alcohol is, by all standards and statistics, one of the most dangerous drugs there is around. So without question, but marijuana, for instance.
Marijuana use and alcohol use has been an ongoing debate for years and years and years, long before I was born. And what is happening now is those topics have been brought up for discussion a lot more recently. Since I remember when I was a teenager, I mean, the thought of marijuana being legalized in any capacity was completely outrageous, and you know, we thought that that was certainly never going to be the case, and that it was illegal, it was bad, that was it. That's the way that, you know, we were taught in our public school systems. That is what the general consensus was since that time, and that was a very short time ago.
By comparison to
I'm
my
admitting
teen
my
years.
age right now.
Yeah. And,
I'm admitting my age right
Yeah.
now, and you know, we were taught in school, you know, just say no, don't do drugs, just say no. I remember the commercials when I was younger, this is your brain on drugs. And, you know, it made it very clear to us that if we, you know, did dangerous drugs or did illegal drugs, that we were going to end up in trouble. Now, my personal opinion on this is that certain drugs have a history of causing harm to other people, to the individual, and are very, very dangerous, such as heroin. Heroin is something that once you try it, it is one of the most highly addictive substances known. And what happens is you try that substance, you are addicted. There is around a 1% success rate for actually kicking the habit and not being on something for the rest of your life to try to cope with not having that drug. People have stolen from their families, they have destroyed their lives as they know it, and they have ended up on the streets because they can't kick the habit, or they end up overdosing right now. And
right, so let's move on to something that's easy. That's an easy one. That's an easy one.
The subject of marijuana, however,
yeah.
has been something that's been put on the ballot, has not been something that has been known to, you know, when medically prescribed, negatively impact somebody's life to the point of something like heroin, for example. So that debate has been ongoing since before I was born. Now, when that was presented to the voters spoke loudly and clearly that they did want to allow for medical marijuana use, and that's for people who have, you know, they're going to get a prescription from their doctor for whatever the ailment is. And the viewpoint is, and some people will beg to differ with their viewpoint, but the viewpoint of the people that voted for this was that, you know, it was something that was going to help people who had cancer or other physical ailments, or maybe some emotional disturbances, maybe extreme anxiety, extreme emotional distress, or what have you. But the voters decided overwhelmingly that they wanted to approve medical marijuana use. So now we as elected officials are basically trying to work together with our constituents to make the best decisions moving forward based on the vote and the opinion of the vast majority of the public.
Yeah, my intention here is really to stick to the ethics and what ethical guidelines are the foundations of law. Mm-hmm. And if liberty is the ethical foundation of law in the United States, then what right does an individual have to choose certain things in the privacy of their own home? And who is the government to say that I don't have a right to do certain things in the privacy of my own home? So I'm not really looking at the consensus of voters as much as I'm looking at the ethical foundations of law, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, things that are ensconced in the Bill of Rights. So I really want to stick with the ethics and use that as a guide for law rather than a consensus of a majority of people that might have fears or feelings that may or may not be grounded in research or grounded in just basic ethics. Mm-hmm. And I think people are allowed to make decisions that are dangerous to themselves. Driving a car is a very dangerous thing. I drive all the time along 495, and people are riding my bumper at 70 miles an hour. You know, that's a very lethal thing.
I think the key that you mentioned.
People should be, a car length for every 10 miles an
Right.
hour, and they don't do it. They bunch up. It's very, very dangerous. But
I think that you
goes on.
touched upon, Dan, a key point that we always need to keep in mind, and that is to what extent is what somebody is doing a danger to themselves and to others in the community.
Right,
to what extent.
The golden rule.
And I think that you really touched upon that in a good way when we talk about freedoms of people to do whatever they want to do. Well, great, somebody might want to speed down the highway at 80 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour or 120 miles an hour, but at what point do we need to say, yes, we're going to allow you to drive. Yes, we're going to allow you to go faster than what you would be doing on a bicycle or walking in a vehicle. But at some point, we have to make sure that we do have guidelines and we do have laws that make sure that our community is safe and that other people are safe with what you're choosing to do.
Yeah, I'm not advocating speeding. I'm saying that driving a car is lethal. And people die, and people get injured, and people get hurt. Driving according to the law with basic safety standards. So people do things. They're allowed to bungee jump. That's an inherently dangerous thing. Some states say that you shouldn't have to wear a helmet, whereas other states say that you should. Some people say that that's a choice, that's a free will thing. Other people would say, well, that has implications on the community. We have to pay for your rehab for the rest of your life because you have a closed head injury. How is that fair that you didn't wear a helmet? So these are kinds of conflicts between the society and the individual and the individual liberty
discussion.
here. Yeah.
And certainly, as you can see, I'm a fairly new legislator. I've only been in for a little over a year and a half. So with our elected officials constantly being changed, with times always changing and new technologies always coming out and new things to worry about and new things to be concerned about. I mean, for example, the internet. When I was a kid, we didn't have the internet, and I'm sure you probably remember that too. But I remember, when AOL first came out and we were dialing up and it was, oh, we're going online, you've got mail. With the internet has brought a whole host of things that we need to make sure that we are vigilant about addressing moving forward and making sure that we are protecting people's liberties while also protecting their privacy, while also making sure that our children are safe. And it's an ongoing discussion. And that's why it's so important to make sure that constituents and residents are always having these conversations, that we're always sharing ideas, that we're always bringing up different issues, because I don't feel, Dan, that any one legislator or elected official has all the answers. I do feel, however, that if a legislator or an elected official or a mayor or a senator, whoever it is in communication with their constituents, that they can make much more well-informed decisions that can be.
Let me ask you another question.
Certainly.
We only have 5 minutes.
Oh, certainly.
So we have to wrap up. I know, it goes
was
very fast, doesn't it? It does.
it
Once you
does.
get into these conversations, you realize.
Very fast.
Yes. One of the things is the Supreme Court has decided that constitutions are persons, and they've
Corporations?
given corporations,
Okay.
transnational, like big oil, like Exxon or some, BP is a person. And they have constitutional rights. They're covered under the First Amendment. They're covered under the 15th Amendment. They're covered under the Dred Scott laws, the amendments, the 13th and the 14th. And they've decided that money is speech under the Roberts Court. And so they can give without limit because speech cannot be restricted. And so if those are persons, how fair, again, going back to the issue of justice and fairness and liberty, if a large multinational corporation in our district is a person, how much more of a voice do they have than I do?
I don't believe that corporations are people. We have actually worked on, and I'm very disappointed by that decision. And what I do have to say is that we have been working tirelessly in the legislature. I was on the Election Laws Committee during this last session, and we had worked tirelessly on making sure that super PACs and corporations claiming to be people were more fully disclosing where their sources of contributions were coming from, and that they were disclosing where all the dark money was coming from. This is a huge issue even in politics today and in the upcoming elections, where we have corporations acting as independent agencies, nonprofit agencies, labeling themselves to be something different than what they are, claiming to be independent organizations looking out for the taxpayer or the average everyday citizen, and really they're not. They'll send out mailings to people's communities, they'll make phone calls on behalf of these supposed independent organizations, but really the money that they're being funded by is by super PACs, by special interest groups, by corporations, and what they are saying is very unfortunate, and what they are doing is very unfortunate. So I am opposed to that. I am in favor of doing everything that we can to overturn that. And we've been working very hard at the legislative level to see what we can do. But it is at the state level, and that's a federal issue at the moment, so we're trying to work in whatever capacity we're able to try to negate some of the negative impacts from that decision.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, Dan.
This has been a good conversation.
Very good conversation.
Yeah, I feel like this could go a lot deeper.
Very philosophical.
Yes.
You're getting deep, Dan,
Yeah,
but I do
trying.
appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I think it is the foundation.
And certainly, this is a discussion, and I think that it's great to actually discuss things. I love hearing new opinions, and we're constantly formulating new opinions, new ideas, getting new information in that might sway our opinions in one way or the other. Legislators' opinions aren't necessarily set in stone, so I invite anybody who's listening, if you'd like to contact me and to let me know about your opinions, please feel free. My contact information is diana.dizoglio@mahouse.gov. And I am the state representative for the 14th Essex District. Thank you, Dan, for having me on the show today.
Thank you,
for getting into this deep and wonderful discussion.
Yeah, awesome, great. And thank you for joining us today on this episode of Perspectives.